Hi everyone, and welcome to my Protection Paladin tank guide for patch 5.4.7. This guide is for people who want to boost a Paladin to 90 using the new boost feature, people leveling prot pallies who want to learn more about the class, and DPS or healer paladins who want to try tanking. Protection Paladin is a tank class with excellent survivability, self-healing, and raid utility. They have smooth damage intake and are a pretty easy class to learn how to tank on. However, amongst all the tank classes, it's also probably the class with the most buttons, by which I mean that the number of personal and raid cooldowns you have is pretty ridiculous. This means that the prot paladin is easy to learn, but difficult to master, because pretty much any time you raid wiped, you probably had spells off cooldown that could have prevented it from happening. So, let's talk about basic ability usage and rotation. The goal of your rotation is to generate holy power and then spend it on active mitigation abilities. The way holy power works is that some of your spells generate 1, some spend up to 3, and you can store up to 5 total. Your two basic holy power generators are Crusader Strike and Judgment. They have 4.5 and 6 second cooldowns respectively, meaning that your rotation ends up looking something like this. Crusader Strike, Judgment, Filler, Crusader Strike, Filler, Judgment, Crusader Strike, Filler, Filler. Here are your filler spells in order of priority for single target tanking. Avenger's Shield is probably your best spell. The only reason you don't just spam this thing off cooldown is that it doesn't generate holy power, usually. But it hits hard, it has range, it hits up to 3 targets and silences them all for 3 seconds. It's great for pulling caster ads since once they're silenced they usually have to run into melee range with you. Additionally, when you dodge or parry, you can sometimes proc Grand Crusader, which refreshes the cooldown on Avenger's Shield and causes it to generate 1 holy power. When this happens, Avenger's Shield is your top filler spell, but still below Judgment and Crusader Strike in priority. Holy Wrath splits damage among all targets near you, but more importantly, it also stuns demons and undead. This priority queue is based around DPS, but obviously your DPS as a tank is not going to be stellar no matter what you do. So, if you can use this to stun some ads, its priority gets bumped up above Avenger's Shield. If you want to look at an AoE rotation, first replace Crusader Strike with Hammer of the Righteous. These two spells share a cooldown and are basically interchangeable, so just use one or the other based on whether you want AoE or single target damage. The new filler priority we get is this. Notice that Judgment is now a filler, meaning for optimal AoE DPS, you actually don't cast it off cooldown, but only when the spells above it are unavailable. Of course, this lowers your holy power generation overall, which lowers your survivability, so if the ads you're tanking have a serious chance of killing you, don't bother with getting that extra 1000 DPS out and put Judgment back into the rotation. Also, if you're tanking a lot of ads, let's say 8 or more, you're probably going to be flooded with Grand Crusader procs, in which case it's acceptable to spam Avenger's Shield off cooldown as every cast will generate holy power and deal a lot of damage. Alright, now you know how to generate holy power, so let's talk about how you spend it. Your two holy power spenders are Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory. They're both off the global cooldown, so you don't need to worry about changing your rotation to use them, just hit them whenever you need to. Shield of the Righteous costs 3 holy power, and reduces your physical damage taken by 25% for 3 seconds. However, that number increases with Mastery, so with my average LFR gear and Blessing of Might, Shield of the Righteous actually reduces damage taken by 49%. Additionally, it should be noted that you can't clip the Shield of the Righteous buff. If the previous buff is still active on you and you use another Shield of the Righteous, it will instead extend the duration by 3 seconds, as shown here. Word of Glory consumes up to 3 holy power and heals the target for about 14,000 per charge. I know this seems pretty low when I have 700,000 health, but we didn't take into account Bastion of Glory. Bastion of Glory is a passive that is applied each time you use Shield of the Righteous, and applies a buff that increases the healing done to yourself with Word of Glory. It's stacked up to 5 times and also scales with your Mastery, meaning even in my gear, a 5-stack Word of Glory heals for about 120,000. Also, keep in mind that during an actual fight, this number will be way higher due to Vengeance, making Word of Glory heal for a couple 100,000 easily. So basically, holy power spending boils down to this. If you need an emergency heal, use Word of Glory. If you're about to take a big physical damage spike, use Shield of the Righteous. And when you're at 5 holy power, use Shield of the Righteous anyway. Putting it all together, here's me performing the Paladin tank single target rotation. Now's a good time to talk about talents and glyphs. Your choices in Tier 1 are all mobility talents. Pursuit of Justice is probably the best choice for people new to the class, as its benefits are entirely passive. But for more experienced tanks, I would definitely recommend Speed of Light, as it's easily the best way to get from point A to point B when you need to move in a raid. Tier 2 doesn't really matter. It's all CC that's largely irrelevant, but Fist of Justice is probably the best one. Tier 3 is the first choice, where you have a significant impact on your rotation. For beginners, I'd recommend Sacred Shield, since it's very easy to use. You just pre-shield yourself before the pull, and then just cast it every 30 seconds once the old one expires. Once you've mastered Holy Power Management and keeping track of Bastion of Glory, I would recommend switching to Eternal Flame though. This spell is basically Word of Glory with a heal overtime component attached. In my gear, the hot heals for 10,000 every 2.27 seconds, or 27,000 if used at 5 stacks of Bastion of Glory. The basic rule for using the spell is, if you have something hitting you, make sure you've used it and have the hot ticking on yourself. If not, save those Bastion of Glory stacks so you can drop a nice big Eternal Flame once you need it. Tier 4, Unbreakable Spirit. Tier 5 affects how you generate Holy Power, meaning all these talents all affect your rotation in some way. I would recommend Divine Purpose for everyone. After you use a Holy Power spender, it has a 25% chance to make your next Holy Power spender free and act like 3 Holy Power was spent. The proc will show up as a golden arc above the center of your screen, somewhere around here, and it can proc off of itself, meaning you can get very long chains of Shield of the Righteous, increasing your uptime on its buffs significantly. Divine Purpose does take some time to get used to, but the basic usage is that if you see the proc, immediately hit Shield of the Righteous. The other viable Tier 5 choice is Holy Avenger. For 18 seconds, it makes all Holy Power generators generate 3 Holy Power instead, meaning you can use it and have 100% uptime on Shield of the Righteous. It's also a pretty huge DPS increase if you combine it with Avenging Wrath, meaning if burst DPS is ever needed in a fight, you can actually output pretty good damage for 18 seconds by using those two skills together. Your last tier is all flexible abilities that can be used to heal or deal damage. I would recommend using Light's Hammer here. It can be used for AoE damage when you're taking a bunch of mobs, or as a mini Tranquility in phases where your entire raid is stacked and taking constant damage, for example Sun Tenderheart's Death Strip measures on the second boss of Siege of Orgrimmar. Execution Sentence is also an okay option, as it's the biggest single target damage spell, but its healing option is not that great, since the healing starts slow and ends big, which is the opposite of what we want as a tank. For Glyphs, I recommend using Glyph of Divine Protection, Glyph of Alabaster Shield, and Glyph of Holy Wrath. That last one makes Holy Wrath stun elementals, dragonkin, and aberrations as well, meaning that many trash mobs or even some boss ads like the Blobs and Immersius can now be stunned by it. Glyph of Consecration gets an honorable mention because it lets you target the spell up to 25 yards away. Sometimes this is useful for picking up ads at range when there's more than 3 and Avenger's Shield can't hit them all. The downside is that one tick of Consecration won't deal very much damage, and overzealous range DPS can still pull the mobs off you. So if you have to pick up mobs at range, it's usually better to just Speed of Light right at them and use Hammer of the Righteous. Minor glyphs don't really matter, but Glyph of Righteous Retreat does allow you to use Divine Shield and Hearthstone to bubble Hearth and safely escape any situation. Proper Bubble Hearth etiquette is to type /wave at the rogue that was ganking you as you deny him his kill. Now let's talk about personal cooldowns, or as I like to call them, oh shit buttons, as in, oh shit, I'm taking a bunch of damage all of a sudden, I need to press a button. Here they are listed roughly in order of increasing effectiveness. First up is Avenging Wrath. Avenging Wrath is actually more of a DPS cooldown, but it does increase the healing you do by 20% for 20 seconds, so you can use it and then pop off a nice big Word of Glory on yourself. Your first real tank cooldown is Divine Protection. With the Glyph and Talent setup in this video, it's got a 30-second cooldown and reduces all damage you take by 20% for 10 seconds. Divine Protection is awesome and should basically be used off cooldown unless you can think of a particular damaging ability that you need to save it for. Next up is Divine Shield. It's got a 5-minute base cooldown, or 2.5 with a talent choice, and makes you invulnerable for 8 seconds. It also removes most debuffs off of you. For a spell that looks this awesome, it's actually not terribly useful, since it makes all targets immediately lose aggro of you and probably go off to murder some DPS and healers. Its main use will be to cheese some encounters, as will be shown in the macros section later. Next up is Ardent Defender. It reduces all damage you take by 20% for 10 seconds, and the next lethal blow you would take instead heals you for 15% of your max health. This spell should basically be used when something is about to kill you, but gauging that is extremely difficult, so in general if you're really low health and have no other options, or you know you're about to get hit by a really big boss nuke for whatever reason, you can use this to survive. Guardian of Ancient Kings. This is a big one. Similar to Shield Wall, Survival Instincts, or other tank cooldowns, it reduces all damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds. As long as you can anticipate damage and use this preemptively, and your healers are not dead or currently in the process of dying, it's basically impossible for you to die while this is up. Lay on Hands. This spell has a base cooldown of 10 minutes, or 5 with our talent choice, and instantly heals a target for an amount equal to your max health. As a tank, this means that unless you're healing your co-tank, the target will probably be healed to full. It's a fantastic emergency heal, and being able to quickly hit it when you see your own health dipping dangerously low will save your life many, many times. Now let's give a quick rundown of some other utility spells in your arsenal. Reckoning is your taunt. Aside from putting you on top of the threat table, taunts in Mists of Pandaria also make you generate 300% threat with the target for 3 seconds. So, as long as you hit your target with a few spells after taunting, there's no way you're going to lose aggro after it wears off. Rebuke is your interrupt. If you have deadly boss mods installed, it should almost always tell you when you can interrupt something. If you don't have deadly boss mods installed, go install it. Fist of Justice is a single target stun that lasts for 6 seconds. Use it to CC annoying mobs like the Bone Crushers on Galakras or the War Shamans on Nazgrim while your raid burns them down. Hand of Protection is worth mentioning as it'll make your target immune to physical damage but unable to attack. For obvious reasons, you shouldn't use this on any tanks or physical DPS, but you can pop it onto a healer or caster DPS if there's some sort of physical damage mechanic bringing them a lot of pain. Devotion Aura is a defensive raid-wide cooldown that reduces magic damage taken by 20% and prevents interrupt effects for 6 seconds. Using this when there are mechanics that deal big raid-wide AoE damage can be the difference between a wipe and a kill, so learn to use this ability well. Buffs. Always have Righteous Fury on. Use Blessing of Might to buff your raid, or Blessing of Kings if the stats buff is needed instead. And always be in Seal of Insight. Stat priority. Hit and expertise caps come first. Do this by any means possible, even if it means using precise primordial rubies. Until then, your Holy Power generators and Shield of the Righteous will sometimes miss and mess up your Shield of the Righteous uptime. After that, I would recommend Stamina greater than Haste greater than Mastery for newer players, and Haste greater than Stamina greater than Mastery once you have a little more experience in gear. Dodge and Parry are terrible stats, so don't bother with them, and also don't bother with any Strength socket bonuses you have in your gear. Macros. I'll post all of these in the description, so don't worry about reading them off the screen. Self-Lay on Hands, Self-Sacred Shield, and Self-Word of Glory macros are quite handy if you're like me and hate hitting alt to self-cast. If you have unused defensive trinkets that give Mastery, Parry, or Dodge, just macro them into Crusader Strike. In my experience, when I have them keybound to a separate button, I end up almost never hitting that button, so at least this way you get something out of those trinkets. Divine Shield macro. This will Divine Shield and immediately taunt, forcing your target to stick to you for 3 seconds, even though you're invulnerable. Hit the same button again just before your taunt expires to cancel Divine Shield. This can be used, for example, to remove Freezing Breath stacks on Thok without making him turn and murder a rogue. And if you use Holy Avenger, it's probably best to just macro it together with Avenging Wrath. Even though their cooldowns don't match up exactly, these two abilities have pretty sick synergy, so you always want to use them both at once whenever possible. I'll close out this video by talking about UI. The 3 add-ons I'd like to talk about are Shadowed Unit Frames, Need to Know, and Weak Auras. Shadowed Unit Frames puts myself, my target, and my target of target in the middle of my screen here. Need to Know shows me the duration of my cooldowns, so I know when they're about to expire and I can use another one if there's a really hard boss phase going on. And most importantly, Weak Auras. Weak Auras tells me everything I need to know about my rotation and the status of my cooldowns and important buffs like Eternal Flame and Bastion of Glory. If someone asked me what's the minimum number of add-ons to tank a raid, I would say Deadly Boss Mods and Weak Auras, with everything else being purely optional. I'll post my Weak Aura strings in the comments, and if you download this add-on and simply import them into your configuration, you should have the exact same layout I have. If you've never used Weak Auras, try it out. It'll take you like 3 minutes to set up and it'll probably change your life. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed tanking as a protection paladin as much as I do.